The mocking stage, the lights in the studio were bright. Too bright. Keanu Reeves blinked as he stepped onto the glossy stage floor. His black boots made soft echoes as he walked to the single chair placed across from the host's oversized desk. The crowd clapped politely, not with excitement, not with admiration, but with the kind of slow, dry rhythm that comes from curiosity, not respect. The host stood waiting, arms folded, an artificial smile on his face. His name was Robert Vale. He was known across the country for his cutting sarcasm and his deep disbelief in anything spiritual. He had built his fame on mocking what others held sacred. He didn't just challenge beliefs, he tore them apart, laughing as the pieces fell. Tonight, he had invited Keanu under the pretense of discussing his recent charity work. But as Keanu sat down, something in the host's eyes warned him. This wasn't going to be a soft interview. Robert leaned forward, tapping his pen against the desk. "So, Keanu," he began, his voice smooth and sharp like glass. "Let's start with something I've always found strange about you." Keanu didn't flinch. He looked back calmly, his eyes soft but steady. Robert smirked. "You believe in God, don't you?" A few chuckles rose from the audience. Keanu nodded once. "I do." "Interesting," Robert said, tilting his head. "How does someone like you, someone who plays assassins and rebels, still believe in a man in the sky?" Keanu didn't respond right away. The silence was heavy, but he didn't rush to fill it. "It's not about a man in the sky," Keanu said slowly. "It's about believing there's something good beyond ourselves, something that gives us hope when the world feels too broken." Robert laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Hope?" he repeated. "Hope is just a trick the mind plays to make suffering feel noble. Tell me, Keanu, when your sister died, did hope save her?" The room fell silent. The audience turned stiff. The cameraman hesitated. Keanu looked down for a moment. He breathed in. The pain that name carried never faded. His sister had passed from leukemia after years of fighting. She had been his best friend. "No," he said softly. "Hope didn't save her, but it helped me hold her hand without breaking." His voice didn't shake, but the weight in it made the room feel colder. Robert seemed caught off guard, but he pushed again. "So, you're telling people that believing in something invisible is better than accepting the truth, that we're just biology?" Keanu leaned back, folding his hands. "I'm not telling people anything. I'm just living what I believe. And if that brings peace, even for a moment, then maybe it's worth more than science can measure." The host laughed again, louder this time, as if trying to drown the quiet truth in Keanu's words. "Do you talk to God, Keanu? Does he answer back?" "Sometimes," Keanu said, "but not always with words. Sometimes it's a silence that feels like comfort, or a stranger showing kindness when I need it most." Robert stood up suddenly and turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, Hollywood's most mysterious actor believes he hears voices." The audience laughed, some awkwardly, some too loud, trying to match the tone of the show. Keanu sat still. He didn't respond. His calm was like a wall that wouldn't break. But one person in the back row didn't laugh. She was young, maybe 20, with red eyes and shaky hands. She had come to the show with her mother's ticket after losing her that week in a car accident. She hadn't slept in days, hadn't eaten much either. She didn't even know why she came here. Maybe just to distract herself. But now, watching Keanu sit there and talk about comfort in silence, she felt something shift. Not a miracle, not a voice, just warmth. For the first time in a week, her breath didn't hurt. Meanwhile, backstage, the producer watched the feed and whispered to her assistant, "Why is this man still calm? We thought he'd either explode or preach. But he's just steady." Keanu leaned forward now, eyes still on Robert. "Faith isn't weakness," he said. "It takes strength to hold on to light when everything around you is dark." Robert narrowed his eyes. Then why are believers the ones crying in hospitals and churches? Keanu's reply was soft. Because we know it's okay to cry. It means you still care. It means you're still human. For a moment, the room held its breath. Robert looked at his cue cards, then crumpled them. Let's cut to break, he said, his voice flat. As the camera light faded, the crew rushed in, but no one said much. Keanu stood, nodded politely, and walked off stage. Robert sat still, staring down at his desk. And in the back row, the girl wiped her eyes, whispering thank you to a man who never even saw her. Whispers in the dark. The city outside the studio was quiet as Keanu Reeves stepped into the black car waiting for him. His driver, a soft-spoken man named Liam, gave a respectful nod and started the engine. No words were exchanged. Keanu stared, out the window, watching the lights blur past. He didn't look upset, not angry, just thoughtful. But inside his chest, a slow ache had begun to form. Not because of Robert's words, he had heard worse before, but because he felt something was stirring beneath the surface, something he couldn't name yet. Back at the studio, Robert Vale sat alone in his dressing room. The makeup lights above his mirror made his tired face look older. His usual routine after interviews was simple. Pour a drink, laugh with his writers, post something sarcastic online. But tonight, he sat in silence, staring at the reflection of a man who didn't look as clever as he felt just hours ago. He reached for his phone, opened the social media app, and paused. The comments were pouring in. Keanu didn't flinch. That's real strength. Why is Robert attacking a man for his beliefs? I came here for laughs, but I'm leaving with something heavier. I lost my brother last month. Thank you, Keanu, for saying what I couldn't. Robert scrolled through them, his thumb trembling. Something in the pit of his stomach tightened. It wasn't guilt, not yet, but it was close. In another corner of the city, the young girl from the audience, her name was Emily, sat on a park bench with her mother's old scarf wrapped around her. She held a half-empty bottle of water and a sketch pad. On the first page, she had drawn something simple, a pair of hands holding another hand, small and fragile. Under it, she had written, "Sometimes it's a silence that feels like comfort." She didn't understand why those words stuck with her, but they did. And when she thought of her mother, for the first time in days, it didn't feel like drowning. Meanwhile, Keanu reached his home, a quiet place surrounded by trees and stone. As he stepped inside, he paused by the small shelf near the door. There was a candle there, half used, beside a photo of his sister smiling. He lit the candle without a word, then sat on the floor beside it. No phone, no music, just silence. The kind he had described earlier. Then he whispered, "Help me stay kind." The next morning, the world hadn't moved on. Clips of the interview flooded the internet. Most were trimmed to the moment Robert mocked Keanu's faith, and the moment Keanu responded with calm, not rage. A news outlet titled it, "Hollywood Star Silenced Hate with Kindness." Others simply called it Keanu's quiet strength. Some mocked him still, called him naive, outdated, too soft. But others, thousands, wrote about how his words made them rethink what strength really looked like in the studio meeting. "Room," Robert's producer dropped a stack of papers on the table. "We're trending in the wrong way," she said, not angry, but firm. "You crossed a line and people noticed." Robert didn't reply. "You invited him for charity work. You ambushed him instead. Now the network wants you to fix it. Fast." He looked at the papers, headlines, social media threads, letters from viewers. But what caught his eye was an envelope. No stamp, no return name. Someone had slipped it through the studio door. He opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "I lost someone recently. Your guest helped me breathe again. Maybe you should ask him about faith, not attack it." No signature. He read it twice, then folded it, gently, and put it in his jacket pocket. Keanu, meanwhile, had spent the day helping at a food bank. No cameras, no announcements, just work. A woman beside him whispered, "Aren't you that actor from the show last night?" He smiled. "Yeah." "What you said?" "It helped me," she said. "I've been angry at God for a long time." Paused, then nodded. "Me too, sometimes." She looked surprised. But you said, "Faith isn't about never hurting," Keanu said. "It's about still standing when you do." That night, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "This is Robert. Would you meet me for coffee?" He stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "Yes." The next evening, they sat across from each other at a quiet cafe. No cameras, no audience. Robert cleared his throat. "I wasn't fair to you." Keanu nodded but didn't interrupt. "You didn't lose your cool. You didn't try to preach. You just stood there, like you'd already heard worse before." "I have," Keanu said quietly. "Then why didn't you fight back?" Keanu looked down at the wooden table, then up again. "Because fighting back isn't always the answer. Sometimes the loudest thing you can say is said in silence." Robert sipped his coffee. "You made me look bad." "No," Keanu said softly. "You made yourself look honest. People saw the real you and the real me. Maybe that's what they needed." Robert frowned. "You think people need faith?" "I think people need something that helps them stand again," Keanu said. "For some, that's God. For others, it's love, or kindness, or purpose. But no one can walk through pain alone." The words hung between them. Robert finally said, "Maybe I've been walking alone too long." Keanu gave a small nod. "Then maybe it's time to walk with someone. Or something." That night, Robert Vale stood alone on his studio stage after the crowd left. The lights were off. The desk was empty. He looked at the chair where Keanu had sat. Then, quietly, he sat in it. Not to mock, not to perform, just to remember what it felt like. To be still. To be open. To not have the last word. And outside the studio, a girl named Emily walked with her sketchpad pressed to her chest. Inside it, on the next page, she had drawn a man sitting in silence beside a candle. Underneath, she wrote, "He didn't try to fix the world. He just stayed kind enough to keep it from breaking more." The broken voice. The next taping of the show began with less energy than usual. The studio audience came in quietly. They weren't there for the usual laughs. Not tonight. Something had changed. Even the crew felt it. A silence hung in the air, not heavy, just thoughtful. Expectant, Robert Vale stood backstage, holding a note card in his hand, but his fingers weren't steady. He had rewritten his opening monologue 4 times and still wasn't satisfied. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what to say. Not because he lacked words, but because none of them felt honest enough. He looked at the stage assistant. "How's the crowd?" The assistant shrugged. "Different. Calm. Maybe waiting for you to say something real this time." Robert gave a small breath of a laugh. The tired kind. Then he nodded and stepped onto the stage. The lights hit him, and the applause came. Softer than before, but not cold. He walked to the desk, sat down, and waited. Instead of starting with a joke, he reached for a paper and held it in both hands. "I made a mistake last week," he said, voice low. "I invited a man here to talk about his kindness, but I didn't offer any of my own." The crowd went silent. "I mocked him for his faith," he continued. "And while I tried to tear something down, he built something quietly. Something stronger than my voice. Something that's still echoing." He looked directly into the camera now. "Keanu Reeves showed me something I didn't expect. Not Just calm, not just grace. He showed me what it means to believe, and to still be kind, even when kindness isn't returned. A few people in the crowd clapped, not for the speech, but for the honesty. Then Robert set the paper down and added, "He doesn't know this yet, but I'd like to invite him back, this time, just to listen." Meanwhile, Keanu had no idea any of this was happening. He was walking through a hospital hallway visiting a child with cancer. The boy's mother had sent a message to his foundation, not expecting a reply. But Keanu showed up. No camera, no press. The boy's name was Daniel, 10 years old. Quiet, wide eyes, pale cheeks. He wore a beanie to cover the hair he no longer had. "You're John Wick," the boy said, barely above a whisper. Keanu knelt beside the bed and smiled. "Sometimes. But right now I'm just Keanu." Daniel smiled weakly. "I liked when you didn't talk much, just looked strong." "That wasn't acting," Keanu said. "Sometimes silence is the best way to say you care." The boy's mother wiped her tears with the edge of her sleeve. "He hasn't smiled in days. Thank you." Keanu looked at her and said gently, "You're the real strength here." He stayed for hours, not saying much, just sitting, playing cards, and holding space. As he left the hospital, a nurse caught up to him. "We saw you on that show," she said. "You made people feel seen." Keanu paused. "I wasn't trying to. That's why it worked," she said. Later that evening, his phone buzzed. It was his manager. "Hey," the voice said. "Robert Vale wants you back on the show. This time, he's not playing games." Keanu didn't speak right away. He said he wants to listen. Keanu walked to the window and looked at the night sky. He could hear distant city sounds, but they felt far away. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll come." The night of the second interview arrived. This time, there was no flashy intro music, no loud cheers. Just a soft light over the stage and 2 chairs instead of 1. As Keanu stepped onto the stage, people clapped, but it felt different, more like respect than excitement. Robert stood to greet him, shook his hand, and said only, "Thank you for coming." They sat. Robert looked at him, then turned slightly to the audience. "I've spent most of my career asking questions that corner people. Tonight I just want to ask, what do you wish more people understood about silence?" Keanu leaned forward, slightly thoughtful. "That silence isn't emptiness. It's where you meet yourself. It's where pain doesn't have to explain itself. It just is." "But isn't it scary?" Robert asked. "Being alone with your thoughts?" "Yes," Keanu replied. "But it's also where healing begins." "How do you know?" Keanu took a breath. His voice was calm, but this time there was something raw underneath. "Because after my sister died," he said, "I sat in a room for 3 days. No phone, no visitors, just the silence. And for a long time, I hated it. But then something shifted, not suddenly, just slowly. I started remembering the way she laughed, the way she used to sing off key when she cooked." He smiled faintly. "And I realized, even grief can become a kind of prayer, a way of saying, I loved you, and I still do." A hush fell over the audience. Robert blinked hard, his throat tightened. "I never believed in anything," he admitted. "But lately, I've started to wonder if belief isn't about answers. Maybe it's about still showing up when the questions hurt." Keanu nodded. "Exactly." "Do you still talk to your sister?" Robert asked softly. Keanu didn't look, surprised by the question. "All the time, not with words, but in the spaces where I feel most human." "Like now?" Robert asked. Keanu looked around the room, people watching, some crying, some just holding their breath. "Yeah," he said. "Like now." As the interview ended, Robert stood again. "I thought I invited you back to help you clear your name. but maybe you came back to help me find mine." Keanu offered a soft smile. "We're all just finding our way." The lights dimmed slowly. No flashy outro. Just quiet applause and faces that wouldn't forget what they'd heard. After the show, backstage, a producer whispered to a crew member, "This isn't just a show anymore. It's something deeper." And outside, on a nearby street, Emily watched the live stream from her phone. She pressed a hand to her chest, where she'd placed a small cross her mother used to wear. She whispered, "Thank you, Keanu. Thank you for bringing the silence back to life." In another quiet room, an old man sat alone. He was a former pastor who had lost his voice years ago after throat surgery. He hadn't spoken in public since, but after watching the interview, he picked up a pen and wrote a short message. "True faith is not loud. It is steady, like Keanu." And far from the city, somewhere only the stars could hear, a young boy named Daniel fell asleep holding a toy Keanu had given him. He whispered, "Into the dark, I think God heard me today, and maybe he did." The burden of light, the studio, was never meant to hold so much silence. It had been built for laughter, applause, sharp jokes, and louder egos. But something had shifted, not just in the show, but in the hearts of those who watched. The interview between Keanu Reeves and Robert Vale had gone viral again, not for controversy, but for compassion. Not for drama, but for depth. People from every corner of the world had begun sending messages, not just to Keanu, but to the show itself. I watched with my husband, who hasn't spoken about his trauma in years. That night, he cried, "I didn't believe in anything. Now I believe in trying again." Keanu didn't convert me. He comforted me. The inbox overflowed. Letters arrived by the dozen. People came not to be entertained anymore. They came to feel understood. Robert Vale sat alone in his office reading these letters. His hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from weight. He was used to being clever, but this was something else. This was responsibility, the kind that whispered late at night and didn't care about ratings. He looked out the window at the rainy city, then reached for his phone. "Keanu," he typed. "Can we talk again?" Not on camera. Just us. Keanu read the message while sitting at the edge of a quiet lake just outside the city. He often came here when the world got too loud. It was early morning, and the sun was just brushing the horizon, soft and gold. He read the message twice, then typed, "Of course." He stayed a little longer by the water, letting the silence settle inside him. Not the empty kind, the full kind, the kind that held stories and questions too deep for words. He had been thinking about his past, the people he had lost, the moments he had survived. People called him kind, strong, wise. But they didn't know the nights he had spent curled up in grief, unable to move. They didn't know the loneliness that followed fame, the guilt that followed success, the fear of saying something wrong and breaking someone who already felt broken. Kindness wasn't something he was born with. It was something he fought to keep. Every day. That evening, Keanu met Robert in a small bookstore cafe, far from the public eye. Robert was already there, seated in a quiet corner, a cup of untouched tea in front of him. He looked different, not just tired, more raw. "Thanks for coming," he said as Keanu sat down. "Always," Keanu replied. Robert leaned forward. "I wanted to tell you something. Maybe confess it." Keanu nodded, giving him space. "After the last show," Robert began slowly, "I got a call from someone I haven't heard from in over a decade. My sister." Keanu's eyebrows lifted slightly. We had a falling out over something stupid, and after that interview, she called me. Said she saw a man sitting in front of me who reminded her of someone she used to love, someone who used to believe in people. She said she missed him. Robert's voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. We're meeting next week. And it's because of you. Keanu shook his head gently. No, it's because of her. And because you were ready. Robert smiled faintly. You keep doing that, turning credit away. Because healing isn't mine to own, Keanu said. It belongs to the person who chooses it. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the soft music from the speakers above. Then Robert said, You know, I used to think faith was a trick, something people told themselves to feel less afraid. Keanu listened. But now, Robert went on, I think maybe faith is the courage to love without proof, to forgive without reason, to be kind without reward. Keanu smiled gently. That's closer to truth than most sermons. Robert chuckled softly. You ever think about preaching? Keanu shook his head. I think living quietly is its own sermon. The next day, something unexpected happened. A major network sent an invitation to Keanu. They wanted to host a special program, not about his movies, but about the impact of quiet strength. They offered money, lots of it. Keanu turned it down. Instead, he wrote a small note and posted it online. If what I said helped you, that's enough. If it made you feel less alone, then I've done something good. I don't need a spotlight. I just need to keep walking with light. Weeks passed, and the ripple kept growing. Emily, the girl from the original studio audience, started writing letters to others who had lost someone. She didn't give advice. She just wrote, I'm here. I know how it feels, and I'm still breathing, so maybe you can too. She started leaving these letters in libraries, coffee shops, hospital waiting rooms. Soon, others began doing the same. People called them letters of quiet. Someone created a website to share them. It spread like fire, a soft fire that warmed instead of burned, and in the center of it all, unknowingly, was the man who refused to be called a hero. Keanu Reeves read some of the letters. Many made him weep, not from sadness, but from the reminder that pain could bloom into something beautiful if held gently. But not everyone understood. One night, a reporter approached him outside an event. Don't you think you're becoming a kind of cult figure? The reporter asked. You barely say anything, and people act like you're a prophet. Keanu paused. I'm not a prophet, he said. I'm just someone who knows what it's like to be broken, and I try not to break others. The reporter raised an eyebrow. So why do you think people follow you? Maybe, Keanu said, because I don't ask them to. That same week, Daniel, the sick boy Keanu had visited, was moved to a different hospital. His condition had worsened. His mother sat beside him, exhausted but trying to stay strong. Daniel whispered, Can I see him again? I don't know if he can come, his mother said, brushing his forehead. But we can pray. Even if he doesn't answer, the boy asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes, even then. Keanu was at home when he received the call. The nurse's voice on the line was trembling. He's asking for you. Keanu didn't ask questions. He didn't check his schedule. He just said, I'm coming. As he drove through the dark, city lights reflecting on the wet road, he thought of all the moments that had led to this, the mocking words, the silence, the tears, the letters, the girl with red eyes, the broken host, the quiet fire, and now, a little boy asking for comfort, not from a doctor, but from a man who had simply listened. He whispered into the night, Let me carry this light well. And somewhere deep inside, he felt an answer. Not in words, just a warmth, just a knowing. Between life and goodbye, the hallway smelled like antiseptic and sleep. Nurses moved gently, like shadows in the dim light. The hospital didn't buzz with chaos tonight. It held its breath, as if the building itself was waiting. Keanu Reeves stepped through the sliding doors with quiet urgency. He wore a plain jacket, the hood down, his eyes focused and soft. The nurse who had called him met him halfway. "Thank you for coming," she said in a low voice, eyes red from holding back tears. "He's still awake. He's asking for you." Keanu nodded. "How's his mother?" "Tired, but she's with him. She hasn't left his side." Keanu followed the nurse down the corridor. His boots made no sound against the floor. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of fear, but because of meaning. He had visited hospitals before, had sat beside beds, held hands, whispered words. But this time felt different, deeper. The nurse stopped at a door with a blue sticker that read, "Quiet room. No loud noise. No visitors without permission." She opened. It for him. Inside, Daniel lay small and still under white sheets. His eyes were half open, but when he saw Keanu, a spark flickered across his face. His mother sat beside him, holding his hand with both of hers. She looked up and mouthed a silent, "Thank you." Keanu walked to the boy's side and sat on the edge of the bed. Daniel's voice was barely more than air. "You came." "Of course," Keanu whispered, taking his hand gently. "I said I'd come." Daniel blinked slowly. "I had a dream. You were there." Keanu leaned closer. "What happened in the dream?" "We were on a hill, watching stars, but they weren't stars. They were candles, floating in the sky." Keanu smiled softly. "Sounds beautiful." Daniel nodded. "You said something, but I forgot what." "Maybe it wasn't words," Keanu said. "Maybe it was just peace." The boy closed his eyes for a moment. "I'm scared." Keanu didn't speak right away. He just held Daniel's hand tighter. "Ipsi." "Too," he finally said. "Sometimes." Daniel opened his eyes again. "You?" "Yes. But it's okay to be scared. It just means your heart is brave enough to care." Tears slipped from the corner of the mother's eyes. Keanu looked at her. "Can I read something to him?" She nodded. "Please." Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a small folded paper. Something he carried with him sometimes. Words that had helped him once. His voice was low, steady. "You do not have to be whole to be loved. You do not have to be fearless to be brave. You only have to breathe. And let the silence say the rest." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's nice." Keanu nodded. "It's true." They sat in silence for a long time. The machines hummed softly. A rain began to fall outside, soft like a lullaby. Daniel's breathing grew slower. His fingers, still, in Keanu's hand, began to loosen. His mother leaned forward, brushing his cheek. "I'm here, baby." Daniel's last words came as a whisper. "Thank you for the light." Then his chest rose one last time, and didn't again. Keanu closed his eyes, his hand still holding the boy's, not letting go, not yet. His mother cried silently. There were no screams, only a grief too deep for sound. The nurse stepped in quietly. She saw the scene and paused. Keanu looked up. His eyes were full, but didn't fall apart. He simply whispered, he wasn't alone. The funeral was private. Just family, close friends, and the few people Daniel had touched in his short life. One of them was Keanu. He didn't speak from the podium. He sat quietly at the back. When it was time, he stood and placed a candle beside the small white coffin. The mother hugged him. "He believed you were his hero," Keanu said. "He was mine." Days passed, then a week. Keanu didn't return to the spotlight. Not yet. Instead, he began writing letters. Personal ones, handwritten. One was for Daniel's mother. Another was for Emily, the girl who had once sat in the studio audience and found peace in his silence. One letter he wrote and never sent. It was to his sister. Hope you saw him. I hope you held him. He was light, and he reminded me how fragile and powerful life is all at once. Meanwhile, the show that once mocked belief had changed. Robert Vale now closed each episode with a simple message. Be kind, especially when you don't understand, because sometimes that's when kindness is needed most. Ratings dropped at first, then rose. Not because of controversy, but because people were tired of noise. They came to hear something real. The letters of quiet spread beyond borders. Volunteers in hospitals began leaving them in waiting rooms. Teachers handed them to students who seemed withdrawn. Strangers left them in library books and on park benches. And slowly, the world felt a little more held. One night, Keanu stood on a rooftop, looking out at the city below. He wasn't filming, wasn't being watched, just breathing. A voice behind him said softly, "You carry so much light." He turned to see Emily. She had grown stronger, her eyes more alive. "I don't carry it," Keanu said. "I just try not to block it." "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Anything. I was going to end everything that night. When I went to the studio, I didn't know how to go on." Keanu didn't speak. He waited. "But then you said that pain is where healing begins, and it reached me." Her eyes shimmered. "So thank you for choosing kindness, even when it wasn't returned." Keanu nodded slowly. "Kindness," he said, "isn't a reaction, it's a choice. Every time." They stood in silence together, the wind passing softly through them. Below, the city moved on, unaware that a man and a girl had just stood between life and goodbye, and chose life. That night, Keanu lit a candle beside his sister's photo, then another beside a new photo. Daniel sat down, closed his eyes, and let the silence speak again. When silence becomes legacy, it was a quiet morning, the kind that felt sacred without needing reason. The streets of the city moved slowly. People carried their coffee cups with calm hands, their eyes softer than usual, as if the world had taken a long breath and remembered to be gentle. Keanu Reeves stepped into a small community center just outside downtown. The building had once been a forgotten library. Now it had been quietly transformed into something new, a place called the Room of Stillness. He walked past shelves of donated books and benches lined with hand-sewn cushions. On the far wall was a simple sign carved from wood. "Leave a ball. Note. Take hope." Beneath it stood a glass box filled with hundreds of letters. Some were crumpled, others folded with care, each one written by a stranger for another stranger. Keanu reached into the box, gently pulled one out, and read, "I haven't spoken to anyone in weeks. But today, someone smiled at me, and it made me want to try again." He smiled, folded the Ichio note, and placed it back. Emily stood at the front desk, organizing papers. She looked up and waved. "It's working," she said. "What is?" Keanu asked. "The silence," she replied. "It's not empty anymore. It's full of voices, gentle ones." Keanu nodded. "That's how healing begins, with a whisper. Over." The weeks that followed, something remarkable unfolded. The letters of quiet reached every continent, translated into dozens of languages, used in therapy rooms, classrooms, train stations, prisons, and churches. News outlets covered the movement, but not with their usual flash. Instead, they sat quietly in the back, listened, and then wrote stories that ended not with outrage, but with peace. A woman in Greece left a note on a bus seat for a stranger she saw crying. A man in South Africa wrote a letter every morning and tied them to trees. A little boy in Japan who couldn't speak yet drew pictures and left them at the hospital where his sister was treated. None of them had ever met Keanu Reeves. And yet, all of them were echoes of the light he had chosen to carry. Meanwhile, Robert Vale stood backstage once again. His show had changed completely, now called Questions Without Answers. The show invited guests not to argue, but to share stories. To be real. To sit in silence if needed. Robert opened each episode with a single question and closed it with the same line. You don't need to understand someone to be kind to them. People said he was softer now, less sharp, but no one complained. 1. Evening after a taping, Robert received a package. Inside was a small candle and a letter with only one sentence. You helped me sit with my grief, not run from it. He lit the candle that night and didn't speak. Keanu Reeves never made a speech about what happened, never asked for recognition, never took credit for the letters or the global kindness movement. But people remembered. They remembered the way he spoke without raising his voice. They remembered the silence that followed him. Not because it was empty, but because it was full of meaning. He kept visiting hospitals, writing letters, showing up. Sometimes he simply sat beside a stranger and held their hand. People said he was a good man, but those who knew better said, he is a quiet one, but he listens so deeply. It changes people. One day Emily brought him a small box. Someone left this at the center, she said. No name, just this. Keanu opened it and found a candle, a folded drawing of stars floating like candles in the sky, and a message in a child's handwriting. Thank you for being light. When I was scared. He recognized the handwriting. It was Daniel's. A copy, maybe. A memory his mother had shared with someone who had kept it alive. Keanu closed the box gently, holding it against his chest. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just sat still and let the silence carry it all. Years later, children would visit the room of stillness on field trips. Teachers would tell the story of how one man, not a preacher, not a politician, not even trying to lead, helped spark a movement that made the world gentler. They would point to a quote on the wall written in soft letters. You do not have to be loud to be powerful. You do not have to be perfect to be kind. Just be present. Just be real. When they asked who said it, the guide would smile and answer, a man who chose kindness when he was mocked for it, and never stopped. And Keanu? He grew older, a little slower, a little more quiet, but still listening, still showing up, still lighting candles for those who couldn't. Because in a world that often praised the loudest voice, he proved that sometimes it's the softest light that stays the longest.